but at the same time, we also kind of almost have to laugh and deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a Publius brand and there's an AJ Rice brand, but I come from a somewhat theater background, and I can tell you that if Billy Shakespeare can do comedies, histories, and tragedies, so can I. So can
Okay.
I. And what is the definition of comedy really, right? Tragedy plus time. Tragedy plus time, right? That's what it is.
Right.
That's one of the definitions. The other definitions of comedy, I think it was something Carlin said once, was it was the ability to transform horror into humor is the definition of comedy. So one of the reasons I do have all these people is what you're seeing right now on your screen is that it's authenticity.
Hey, folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm here with AJ Rice. He is the CEO of Publius PR. It is one of those words that I'm just going to struggle pronouncing, but I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it, brother. I appreciate it. With a last name like Demos, which I think is Greek, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, I would think that you might be able to get there with the Latin, going into the Greek to the Latin to the Greek, the Greek to the Latin. But you know,
Well,
we'll have a Hellenic discussion another time.
yeah, but the Greeks had to get rid of Latin. I mean, we
That's
just
true.
kind of borrowed it, so that way I didn't have to pronounce words like Publius anymore. So
Well, unfortunately for the Democrat Party, they've had to pronounce it a lot recently
I was going to
because
ask. So tell
yes.
me well, first of all, where did you get that word for the name of your company?
So I'm assuming you're familiar with the Federalist Papers.
Yes.
Okay. The Federalist Papers were written by three men, one from Virginia, that's about 30 minutes from where I'm sitting, and two from New York State. The two from New York State would be John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. And the one from Virginia would be James Madison. Now, when they were trying to rally the country so that we could have a founding document like the Constitution, the arguments that they were making, they made under a pen name, a nom de plume. And their arguments, we now know who wrote which ones, but at the time, no one knew. The only thing we knew was in the newspaper business of the 13 colonies, which were like, pamphlets. There were newspapers printing it, and there were pamphleteers, right? What Ben Franklin was. He was a printer, among other things. They were all writing under this name, and that was Publius. Now, that became the Federalist Papers, and that became the United States Constitution, which had a big day this week. But they got it. Jay, Madison, and Hamilton, I got it from them. But they got it from the ancient Roman Republic. Publius was actually a person that was very smart, orator. He was a contemporary, I believe, of Cicero. So they got it from there. They got it from the Roman Republic, and then I got it from them, and then Peter the Greek got it from me. So
Sounds
that's how
good.
it works. That's how it works. Pass it down the lane.
Now you represent your firm represents a lot of people that are kind of in the news now, right? Like especially it's going in with Trump's cabinet and trying to get all confirmed, everything like that. Am I right?
Sure. So my day job is running Publius PR. For some reason, a couple of years ago, I decided to write my own books. I guess I'm a masochist. I wanted to put myself through the pain that I put hundreds in every year, right? By promoting their book. or getting it published and so on, managing it. So yeah, Publius PR, very busy right now. Are you familiar with this term, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Used to play
Okay,
that game all the time when I was supposed to be paying attention in law school.
sure. So it's like 6 degrees of separation becomes 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And of course, 6 degrees of separation was this game where this theory that every human on Earth, and I'm not sure this is the case anymore because we've had a population boom here, but that every human on Earth is only 6 degrees separated by everyone else. And then that became the pop culture phenomenon about Kevin Bacon. And he didn't like it at first, because the game was that any actor in Hollywood could be separated by Kevin Bacon by six maneuvers, right? I'm a fan of Bacon. I'm not necessarily a fan of all his politics. I've seen him and his brother. They have a folk music group, but like all extremely parochial founding cities, Philadelphia, other than Boston, Philadelphia is the most parochial. Like, we'll defend almost any behavior if you're from Philadelphia, right? And long before Nick Foles beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, we used to say, I don't, Saddam Hussein, if Saddam Hussein could win the Eagles a Super Bowl, we'll take it, because we have been around the longest with no Super Bowl wins. Now, obviously, we didn't need Saddam Hussein. Nick Foles did it for us. Backup quarterback beat Tom Brady on a day when Brady threw for 500 yards.
But you booed Mike Smith and you booed
We
Santa
boo all of them.
Claus. I
We boo
mean,
all of them. We boo all of them. Well, Santa Claus, we did some damage to. We didn't just boo Santa Claus. We're throwing snowballs at him. Look, we booed Dr. J. We booed all of them. Okay, Donovan McNabb. Believe me. Now, Nick Foles will never get booed, and there's already a statue of him. He's like a folk hero. But so Kevin Bacon's from Philadelphia, so that's where I was going with that. And like Kevin Bacon, so am I, as I'm sure the audience can hear from this accent. And when it comes to Publius PR and when it comes to Trump's cabinet, boy, we are responsible for like half of the big nominees, and then all kinds of other people that have been nominated for different positions. Some of them are because before I was in PR, I was an executive producer of shows like this one. Others are because we have worked on their projects. Now, who am I talking about? Well, if I start at the top of the food chain there, I guess it would be Pete Hegseth. I've known Pete for 20 years. I've worked on his books. We're buddies. He gave me a blurb for my first book, not this one behind me, but this is volume 2 behind me. Volume 1 was called The Woking Dead. He gave me a blurb for that, an endorsement for that. Scott Bessent is the Secretary of the Treasury nominee. He actually was the owner of a publishing house called All Seasons Press, which put out a lot of great books, some New York Times bestsellers, Naomi Wolf, Chadwick Moore, Peter Navarro, and many others. So I know him, I worked for him for like 4 years. And he was kind of behind the scenes at first, and then he had to sort of step out from behind the curtain for various reasons. So he's probably going to be confirmed in the next day or so, Treasury Secretary. Now, RFK Jr., in full disclosure, we're still working with his super PAC. We do media for them. We also work with his publishing house, which is Skyhorse, and we promote his books. The big one, of course, the Dr. Fauci book. So we know him and his team really well. So they're the sort of the 3 big ones, other than at least when it comes to line of succession and cabinet secretaries. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, we did her book last summer. We're helping her now. She's amazing. She's up for Director of National Intelligence. The Democrats are going to do everything they can to keep her from that. So we're going to try to help there. Michael Waltz, who's going to be National Security Advisor. Now, he doesn't need to be confirmed because Congressman Michael Waltz from Florida. We actually did a children's, like a conservative, Christian children's book with him. And look, he's in good hands. His chief of staff is Hugh Hewitt's son. I mean, he's smart. These are smart people. These are very good people around Donald Trump. This ain't like last time, where all the grifters and the trash men came in, all the the deep staters and the swamp creatures. This is Trump's team. We work with Vivek Ramaswamy, and then there's all kinds of other people that are like Undersecretary of the Air Force we've worked with, and Sergio Gore, longtime ally of Donald Trump Jr., who's our client. So the White House is being staffed by a lot of our people. And the one thing the audience needs to know about what their government's going to look like here, and I think this is what probably this audience and obviously a majority of America wanted. If historians could call Abraham Lincoln the great emancipator, and they should, and they called Reagan the great communicator, Donald Trump is probably the great disruptor. The great disruptor. And he's not coming alone this time. Every one of these people I just named, and there are others, are part of the disruption. And yes, as Greek people know, the fish rots from the head, and you do need to change the tops of these departments and these agencies. Absolutely. And look, my publisher is the same as Kash Patel. We know him. I know people that know Pam Bondi. I mean, these are all solid picks. But what they are also is disruptors. They are disruptors. They are mini disruptors. In some cases, like RFK Jr. and Bondi and others, I mean, Bondi was at war with the Department of Justice over the 2020 election. She was one of Trump's lawyers. She was an impeachment defense lawyer against, impeachment proceedings. So they are now going to be in charge of. Tulsi was being followed because Hillary said she's a Russian agent. Ugh, she eats Chinese food with Putin. She eats Chinese food with Putin. It's insane. Obviously, they throw whatever they can at the wall, but they're not Italian, so it doesn't stick. And so, but Tulsi's going to have to go in, and I'll tell you right now, she's a lieutenant colonel. She's going to give them a haircut. She gave Kamala a haircut in that debate in 2020. So that's what you need to understand. You can't just replace the tops of these cabinet positions. You have to drop a bunker buster 10 levels down. And that is what this dream team, this team of MAGA Avengers that he has compiled is going to do. I remember all the talk from all the experts and all the smart people and all the people with the degrees on the walls and all the people that didn't go to state schools. They told me when Barack Hussein Obama was elected, and they all had Hussein in the membrane, I was told by Doris Kearns Goodwin, the great phony on MSNBC historian, that Obama had put together a team of rivals. No, he didn't. Hillary, yeah, okay. But they were all ideologically the same. They all had the same sort of fancy life story. I mean, Obama was actually the person closest to the streets than any of them.
Right.
And, there was no ideological diversity. He made his personal lawyer the attorney general. Okay. Touche, Pam Bondi. All right. But I will tell you, this cabinet, I mean, this is the most ideologically diverse cabinet ever. I mean, Bessent managed one of George Soros's funds at one point.
So,
right?
so you're seeing all this, but you're seeing all this. Obviously, this is a lot of serious people coming in and doing serious type stuff, and you're representing, you represent in some capacity around that. But you also focus a lot on parody, satire, et cetera. How do you manage to not let one bleed into the other? I think there's some healthiness in it. I mean, we can look at, a lot of times I don't know what's going on. I read a headline in the Babylon Bee, and then I'm like, oh, wait a second, what really happened? And then you read the real story, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's worse than the satire it was. When you're dealing with that, because when I read your book behind you, for example, it's very satirical in a sense. So how do you do that? How do you handle that and recognize we're dealing with some serious issues here, but at the same time, we also kind of almost have to laugh and deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a Publius brand and there's an AJ Rice brand, but I come.
In Acts 5, we see that when Peter and the other disciples were ordered to stop talking about Jesus, they responded, "We obey God and not man." In 2020, we saw something we never thought we could see in this country. They shut down our churches. After decades of removing God from schools and public institutions, they went straight at our community. Unfortunately, we as Christians did not know what to do, and even worse, we chose to listen to false prophets masquerading as Christians on how to respond. I recognize this is the only beginning, and we need to know how to respond. We have a duty to say no to unjust laws, but as Christians, we have a greater duty to God. In my book, On the Duty of Christian Civil Disobedience, I use biblical teachings to help believers know when and how to stand up to those in charge when they ask us to commit evil. You can go to peterdemas.org to find out about our duty to say no. And when you type in the code UNCOMMON, you can get 10% off your order. That's uncommon at peterdemas.org. Remember, we are to obey God and not man.
From a somewhat theater background, and I can tell you that if Billy Shakespeare can do comedies, histories, and tragedies, so can I. So can I. And what is the definition of comedy really, right? Tragedy plus time. Tragedy plus time, right? That's what it is. That's one of the definitions. The other definitions of comedy, I think it was something Carlin said once, was it was the ability to transform horror into humor is the definition of comedy. So one of the reasons I do have all these people is what you're seeing right now on your screen is that it's authenticity. Yes, I use my books and columns and a lot of my interviews to do what Limbaugh used to say, and that is to use irreverent humor to illustrate truth. Use absurdity to illustrate truth, right? All the great comedians do that, regardless of whether they're right wing, left wing, whatever it is. I don't care whether it's Groucho Marx or Richard Pryor, it doesn't matter, right? Jack Benny, whoever it is. And we've gotten a little bit away from that with the people that are supposed to be entertaining us. So, instead of looking to those people, you get hybrid people. Greg Gutfeld's a hybrid guy. Bill Maher's a hybrid guy. Steven Crowder's a hybrid guy, and you're looking at one right here. I mean, look, I've written 2 books. They're both funny, but they're also, horrific and deathly serious in some parts. And they also are there to be a teaching vessel through humor, and reach certain audiences that, the choirs can't reach. Right? I mean, look, Barron Trump told his father, hey, I don't know whether he said it this way, but this is what happened. 6% of the electorate was undecided before the election. So where were they hiding? Where were they hiding? They weren't hiding at the Wall Street Journal editorial page. They weren't hiding at the New York Times newsroom. They weren't hiding at the Chamber of Commerce. Where were they hiding? Well, I'll tell you where. They were hiding on these podcasts that Barron told him to go do. Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and this one and that one, right? The Nelk boys, the bros, Andrew Schultz. And if you examine a guy like Rogan, Rogan's kind of gone through, and Rogan's been around a long time.
Yep.
He was on the Man Show with Adam Carolla when Jimmy Kimmel left. He's done stand-up. He's done a lot of stuff. But, if you ask yourself, what did the Democratic Party do wrong? And some of their people are out there going, we need to find our own Joe Rogan. Well, here's the problem with that statement. You probably need to find your own Tulsi Gabbard too, but here's the problem with that statement. Or your own RFK Jr. Well, here's the problem with that statement. Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Rogan both endorsed Bernie Sanders. And then 4 years later and 8 years later, they endorsed Donald Trump. So what did you do? ladies and gentlemen. What did you do to lose them? You had them. You had the oldest male heir of the most famous, not just Catholic, but Democrat family of the last century. The oldest male heir. And he's running in a primary against Joe, RFK Jr.
Yep.
And they won't let him debate Joe. And then once we saw Joe debate Trump, and Trump unplugged the extension cords from the wall, right? Can you imagine if they would have allowed Bobby to get him? Can you imagine if Bobby got to him 3 months earlier in a primary debate?
Oh, it would have been over.
It might have been an RFK Jr. versus Trump,
Yes.
Contest. We don't know. But my point is, they did this. They lost Joe Rogan. They lost Naomi Wolf. Right?
Yep.
So, look, that's okay. There's plenty of jokes to go around. Some of it's serious. You got to, I have a certain presentation that, some people like, some people don't. But I will tell you, for all this talk about the Great Reset, wokeism and globalism, the Gemini of evil, and how they're gonna reset all of us. We're gonna reset our diet, vaccines, and the politics, and the weaponization of justice, and World Economic Forum talking about how we don't need to own things, and we'll be very happy not owning a home, and all those other things that they say. Well, you just got a great reset. Wasn't the one you were looking for. But the Republicans now control all the houses of Congress. They have a majority on the Supreme Court. They have a deep bench of governors, including J.D. Vance, our first millennial president or vice president. Big shout out to the millennials out there. I'm one of them. I'm a geriatric millennial, but I'm a millennial nonetheless. And I'll tell you, there is a reset that has happened here because, and this is the one thing the Democrats never really understood about Trump. He's not really an ideological guy.
Right.
So he's got former Democrat Congresswoman, a gay male married to a man with children, Scott Bessent, who worked for George Soros, whose signature is going to be on all your money soon when he's a Treasury Secretary. RFK Jr., who, not every conservative agrees with on everything, right? Global warming and abortion and all kinds of things. But this was about bringing together a multi-ideological, multi-ethnic, more working class coalition that shattered the left. It shattered them. They're shattered.
But do you think?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I got to ask this because parody. There's a quote out there, and I can't remember who to attribute it to, but parody depends on people being reasonable. Now, when you look at the left, and I think part of their success in the 70s and 80s is I think, they were able to use comedy, to use satire, to really kind of twist and turn against people. But it doesn't seem, because they're so worried about words offending and hurting everybody's feelings, right, and they're so worried about it, it seems like they lost the art of satire, which has been going back, obviously, to Shakespeare, to the Roman and Greek civilizations. So do you think that's where some of this problem is when you say, hey, they lost the Joe Rogans and they lost this? It's because they're so worried about every little word and their feelings about it than they are about actually put forth some effort to actually fix a problem.
Right. But if you're talking about the court jesters of the culture. And it's not just comedians. It's,
you listen to Trump's roast. I mean, that was unreal, incredible.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
sure. Well, I mean, he's Rickles, right?
Yeah.
He's doing Rickles. But, today, if Rickles was out there and he was 25 years old making the jokes he used to make, they'd throw him in the woke gulag. So here's what I want to say. Somewhere along the line here, and it's because of cultural Marxism, political correctness, which is basically wokeism and DEI and the social justice warriors and cancel culture. That's who got defeated here. This was a woke Waterloo moment for them. But they're not going to go away. They're like an STD. They'll flare up. But I will tell you, the counterculture movement, and I don't care whether you're Bob Dylan or Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon
Right.
Papers, or Woodstock or the Civil Rights Movement, whatever the hell it is. Your job was to be rock and roll. Your job was to be punk rock. Your job was to be steampunk. Your job was to be gangster rap. I don't care whether it's Chuck D or Van Morrison. It doesn't matter. Your job was to take it to the man, to rage against the machine, so to speak. And yet, in the last decade, I've seen more and more entertainers wrap their arms around the Pentagon, and wrap their arms around the pharmaceutical companies,
Right.
and wrap their arms around Zelensky's bombs. I mean, listen to this. During COVID, the two old timers, Slowhand and the Northern Irishman named Van Morrison, so Eric Clapton and Van Morrison, said that I'm not going to perform in a specific venue if you force my people to get vaccinated. These two old time boomer guys. And yet, and I just mentioned them, Rage Against the Machine, whose entire name means, F you, forced everyone that wanted to come see them to get vaccinated. So these guys, they've become company men.
They become
shills. They're shills. Howard Stern, who I used to love. Howard Stern became a shill. This was the original bad boy. Getting fired, playing, bestiality, dial-a-date, midgets everywhere, and craziness. Stuff that maybe this audience doesn't want to see anyway. But he was a First Amendment absolutist. And unfortunately, Jimmy Kimmel and Seth Meyers and Stephen Colbert and the rest of the monochromatic Gen X doughy white guys there at night, they are not free speech absolutists. They cherry pick. They're not there to make fun of everyone like a Bill Maher or a Dave Chappelle or a Ricky Gervais. And we lose something when you're afraid. I think it was Penn Jillette, from Penn and Teller.
Yeah, yeah.
He's a big time libertarian. He might not like Trump, but he's a free speech absolutist. Although he might like Trump now, I don't know. A lot of people changed their mind. Snoop Dogg and all the rest of them, like Mark Zuckerberg, all the rest of them. But he used to say that you will recognize, and Carlin used to say something similar too. You will recognize that totalitarianism has arrived when the comedians are afraid. Because if you think about it,
absolutely,
comedians are the first recorders of history. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember after 9/11, Jon Stewart's crying over on the Daily Show. That's fine. I was crying too. September 11th, 2001. I remember, Letterman in particular, because he's in New York. Leno's in LA at the time. And Letterman came out after a week off after the attacks on CBS, and he, gave this speech monologue that kind of allowed the country to heal a little bit with some humor, but also sort of exhale. He made it okay to be funny again for a second, right? Now Letterman, he wasn't a big fan of George W. Bush and Trump, and if you see him now, he looks like a he looks like a hippie fentanyl dealer or something. Like I don't know. But
is he the Santa Claus you'll boot at?
Yeah, it looks like fentanyl Moses or something. He looks like a homeless, fentanyl guy. But I will tell you, there's something to that. There's something to, and Carlin used to say when fascism comes, for comedy, it's going to come from the left because they're the ones. Because even in the 90s, when Bill Maher was hosting, Real Time with Bill Maher, and Carlin was on there a lot. Maher was a big Carlin guy. I'm sorry, politically incorrect with Bill Maher.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and look, Maher got fired for a joke about the 9/11 hijackers. So, there is a fine line there. Seinfeld says, you can joke about anything, but it needs to be funny. You can make Holocaust jokes. You can make, September 11th jokes. You make all kinds of jokes, but funny is the key. Because if it ain't funny, that could come for you. And that's sort of the calibration that, whether you're a court jester in front of, Henry V, or whether you're some kid that's starting to stand up in, some basement club somewhere in Pittsburgh, that's sort of the key. And you have to kind of go through that fire. And some really funny people are never good at stand-up. Guys like, Larry David, famously used to yell back at the crowd. There's all kinds of people that stand-up's not their thing. They're funny in other ways. Woody Allen and many others. Then there's other people that are just masters. They're masters.
The Demas's family has been in the restaurant business for many generations. We have been serving people in the Middle Tennessee market for 34 years. Try our spaghetti kits, our pot roast, which we slow cook for 4 hours, or our world famous baked chicken and rice soup, which many locals have dubbed Greek penicillin for when you feel under the weather. We make our food fresh, and upon placing our order with us, we freeze the order and send it to your house. Demas's is more than a business. 5 generations of restaurant operators have taught us many things about food, but more importantly, we have recognized that we don't sell food. We sell the experience of bringing people and families together, which our country desperately needs. So go to demasfamilykitchen.com and share in this journey today. And for right now, use the code UNCOMMON to get 10% off of your order. That's demasfamilykitchen.com.
Richard Pryor, Don Rickles. But there always had been taboo stuff. And I'm reminded of a story about Lenny Bruce. And actually, for my 3rd book, I just wrote about this recently. Lenny Bruce, this is back. Lenny Bruce is doing R-rated comedy when, there were blue book laws in New York City and LA and Chicago where you couldn't make certain jokes or the cops show up. The freaking cops show up. So it's not like, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram deplatformed you and demonetized you and shadow banned. No, if you told a joke about like pregnant people having sex or something, or made fun of the Kennedys or made fun of the Pope or whatever it was, they would come for you. And their cops would be parked in the theater waiting for Lenny to violate an obscenity law, right? Or become too libertine. It's a word that doesn't get used as much, right? It should get used. And then they would arrest him. So Lenny used to say in one of his sets, he used to say, look, and this will remind people of some of the stuff we just went through. You can make fun of God, but you better make fun of the right God. Because if you make fun of the wrong God, if you make fun of, John F. Kennedy or J. Edgar Hoover or, the Pope or, Billy Graham or whoever, he used to make fun of all kinds of people. He used to make fun of the Democrats, Republicans. He made fun of everyone from the Kennedys to Johnson to Nixon. I mean, he died by the time Nixon was really around. But my point is, he was an equal opportunity offender. But he's right. Because if you fast forward to today, what happens to Dave Chappelle when he starts making fun of trans people? Well, he goes to the Hollywood Bowl and some nut jumps on stage with a knife, a gun, tries to tackle him, And that's the trans mafia. The trans mafia is like the real mafia. I mean, they will try to whack you if you claim that there's not 72 genders and there's only 2. Okay?
And well, we're
Right?
seeing that in the UK as well. I mean,
Sure,
the
brother.
police are arresting people for social media posts. They
Exactly.
arrested the guy. They convicted the guy who silently prayed behind a tree within the buffer zone of an abortion clinic.
Right.
I mean, and usually we see what happens in England like a few years before it starts to come here.
Canada too. Canada was arresting
Yeah.
people for all kinds of stuff. I mean, Mark Stein. I mean, these guys, they get, and that's just it. I mean, they don't have the First Amendment the way we do, but don't think that we haven't done some of this. I mean,
Yeah.
the Me Too movement and political correctness and wokeism has tried to retcon or banish or erase all kinds of people. And we're coming through this, and there are some moments where you have, and look, I write about this in both books, and look, ladies and gentlemen, The Woking Dead, Volume 1, just out on paperback. White Privilege album with an apology to the Beatles has been out since September. Both are selling, like hotcakes. And I write about this exact stuff that we're talking about now is in both books. So, rather than go through every book line by line, Peter and I, we're going to have a little discussion about the big themes. And, you have to understand that they will come for you. If they can't, I call them the digital brown shirts, where you get tossed off of different social media platforms, and some of that is subsiding. But when we fight back, Ricky Gervais, for example, at the Golden Globes, standing there in front of all those entertainers, saying, Epstein, Weinstein, Epstein, Weinstein, Epstein, Weinstein, right? And blowing them up. And if Diddy had happened, he'd have used that on him too. That's huge for the culture. I know it's not, who's running for Congress in South Carolina. Okay. But like Andrew Breitbart used to say, the American people are downstream from culture more than politics. Bud Light, who didn't apparently know who their audience was, their customers, decided to put a tranny in a bathtub with 2 Bud Light pounders. And Kid Rock, with the most famous AR-15 in history, basically stacked a bunch of Bud Lights up on his Instagram account, TikTok account, and lit them up. These are woke Waterloo moments that push back. It's not the whole war, culture war. It's a battle. It's a battle. When Elon bought Twitter and reinstituted everyone's accounts, that was the greatest digital jailbreak in history. It was a jailbreak.
Right.
That's what it was. Half my clients were in jail. To this day, your humble publicist, am still banned from LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn was banning people.
Well, not only are they banning people, they're banning the GOAT. See the GOAT back here? Okay?
You got 3 of them.
The greatest of all time. Conservative publicist of all time, with the MAGA Avengers team, the center of the MAGA cinematic universe here, and the Maha one. And you would think I would lose all my clients and no one would be able to find me without LinkedIn. Oh boy, you taught me a lesson, schmucks. So look, they're out there. They're going to continue to do this stuff. The scary part is when it goes from being digital to physical, right? And they go after Chappelle, and some guy jumped on stage with Lee Zeldin in New York. And look, and I know you talk about religion here a lot, and there are some ideologies out there that are not atheist left-wing ones that, for example, radical Islam, totalitarians of a feather can flock together. So when you see the Queers for Palestine, which is insane, by the way, and you see people that if they were in Palestine, they would get stoned to death or thrown off the roof. There is they will all get in the same totalitarian rowboat together. I mean, look what happened to Salman Rushdie. I mean, he wrote a book making fun of Muhammad called The Satanic Verses 30 years ago. And Iran put a fatwa out on them, on him. And, it wasn't acted upon until 30 years later by some guy that wasn't even born. And he almost stabbed him to death, jumped on stage. I mean, just remember those those pictures of, the Taliban firing those RPGs at those Buddhist statues, or um, ISIS in Syria crushing all those old Chaldean and Assyrian Christian churches, or some of the
Right.
oldest churches on earth. They're just bulldozing this stuff. They don't care. They do it in India all the time. They destroy Hindu temples. And look, I mean, Islam marched its way into Constantinople and turned the second biggest church, the second most important church in all of Western civilization, which I believe was called the Hagia Sophia, turned that into a giant mosque in the middle of Istanbul. Constantinople's gone. It's now called Istanbul. I mean, no
But
one seems
are you
to be that
afraid?
upset.
But are you afraid now? Okay, and I agree with you. This is the best, the great disruptor. I think it's a great name. I hope it catches on, because I think you're 100% correct on it, and I love it, even when I disagree with several of the people he puts on there. However, is there a fear involved that, like Rage Against the Machine, that becomes the machine? Is there afraid that these disruptors will become the same thing that they're supposed to be disrupting, and create something from there? Why do you think they're immune from that same type of plague that gets all the others?
You mean like co-opted by the sort of
Yeah, yeah.
swampy deep state establishment? I mean, look, part of the reason is none of these people needed this. None of them. None of them were looking to burnish their resume. Most of them were some form of anti-globalism, anti-wokeism, freedom fighters. Very few of them, a lot of them have plenty of money. So just like Trump, who didn't need this, guy's worth $9 billion. He had a wonderful life. I mean, look at his family. Look at his wife. Look at all three of his wives. He didn't need any of this. But he loves the country. And I can't speak for all of them, because I don't know Marco Rubio that well, but Rubio's gone through an evolution, and everyone seems to have accepted it. I mean, Trump was calling him Little Marco 8 years ago.
Well, JD Vance hated Trump, 8 years, I mean, 4 years ago, 8 years ago. So
That's right.
yeah.
And like I told you, Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Bernie Sanders for president.
Right.
Look at RFK Jr. Trump has sued, or RFK Jr. has sued Trump a bunch of times. You ever hear the story about RFK Jr. suing Trump? RFK Jr. tells this story better than I do, and I'll just paraphrase it. He was suing Trump, and they both were going to, I think they were flying from New York to DC to be part of the lawsuit, where one was suing the other. And Trump, I think, invited RFK Jr. to fly down there on his plane with him. The guy that's suing him.
I'm sorry, that's Lincoln S. I mean, that really
I know.
is.
I mean, it's like, ladies and gentlemen, just enjoy these next 4 years, because I've been in this. I might not look it, but I've been doing this a long time. I'm now 20 years here in the swamp, and I was working in Philadelphia politics before that. Southeast Pennsylvania politics, and you're never going to see anything like this again. You'll see something else. Ronald Reagan was something else, and a lot of Trump people started there. They started with Reagan, and there are Trump people that will end up somewhere else later, decade or so from now. You'll see something else that will blow your mind. But what you're witnessing now should be blowing your mind, and you're never going to see anything like this again, right? There were some disruptors like Trump in the past. Two of them were Democrats, Andrew Jackson and Harry Truman. And then obviously Teddy Roosevelt is the greatest disruptor other than Trump of all time. He's a Republican from New York, like Trump. So look, my books are a comedic defense of Western civilization, the middle class, and the nuclear family. And I use humor, by sort of illustrating absurdity, and then sort of seeking truth through that absurdity to defend these things. to defend these things, remind people how crazy some of this has gotten,
Right.
and to use comedy to shine a light on things that, some messages just, if you get your news from one or two sources, if you're not, and most Americans, quite frankly, with this economy, don't have time to to do what we do all day. We're junkies, right? So that's what I try to do, especially with the White Privilege album. And the subtitle of it is Bringing Racial Harmony to Very Fine People on Both Sides. And I just have to say, I know, Peter, that this audience is filled with many, many very fine people, probably on both sides. And if you look at what just happened, one politician seems to be bringing racial harmony to very fine people, because one politician was able to get the Jewish voters in the suburbs of Philadelphia to vote the same exact way as the Dearborn, Michigan Muslims. And it wasn't because he was Hitler, ultra MAGA, fascist. For all the talk about the blue wall in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, there was another blue wall. And the other blue wall runs from Brownsville, Texas to El Paso, on the, Mexican Texas border, right next to the Gulf of America, might I add. Those were all blue counties of people that weren't exactly Scandinavian. And they've got Democrat congressmen, and all those counties flipped to Trump. And they're filled with Hispanics. So Hispanics, this isn't about finding all the Hispanics and deporting them. Hispanics voted for Trump more.
Have you ever been stranded with a flat tire in the middle of nowhere? My first semester home from college, I was driving back to college, and that's what happened. I was halfway between two places, a couple miles from the exits, and I had to walk miles in the cold to get to a phone. That's why I would have loved at that point in time to have Air Moto, and that's why I bought it for my wife and kids, especially when they're traveling to remote places. With Air Moto, they don't have to depend on anyone else for help. They don't have to depend on walking or waiting in their car, hoping that nobody comes along while they're waiting for their friends or family to pick them up. This compact, high-quality tool is always ready to go. You can put it right in the glove box, and it can actually inflate all four vehicle tires in a matter of minutes. It's powerful, it's reliable, and it gives my family peace of mind. Airmoto keeps us prepared for all the things that can happen to us with our tires while we're going. It's a great Christmas gift this year, and it'll just help you kind of just feel very comfortable for your wife and family as they travel. So highly encourage you to get it. You can go to airmoto.com, or you can check out the link below in there and click through the link in order to order yours today.
Than any Republican in a generation. And there weren't that many back when Reagan got a bunch of them. Trump won Nevada for the first time since George W. Bush in 2004. Now, some of that is no tax on tips, the service industry with the gaming,
right,
with the hotels and everything. But Latins, Arizona, cakewalk. He almost won New Mexico, and I think that's next. That'll be flipping next. And, it's not because he shied away from tough language. But it does prove that George W. Bush used to say, family values don't stop at the Rio Grande. Well, turns out MAGA values don't stop there either. So, look at all the African Americans that have moved in the Republican Party's direction. So, unbeknownst to me, I don't want to give the Republican Party advice, but maybe that's my job. You have a brand new working class multi-ethnic coalition if you can keep it. I think JD Vance can keep it.
Yep, I agree.
But the pencil necks from the Chamber of Commerce in the back of the room, they're not real happy. And that's probably a good thing. So, like I said earlier in the show, Trump has reset the board. He's reset the board. And look, I'm a social commentator in addition to my day job. So, when you hear terms like white privilege or the patriarchy or, toxic masculinity, this is all code by the left. because they don't like Western civilization. They don't like the middle class. They don't like the nuclear family. And guess what? None of those things have a color. You could come to this country legally and participate in the great experiment here and be a member of the middle class and have a nuclear family and, celebrate Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman civilization. And that doesn't mean we can't be a melting pot. That doesn't mean we can't do a shot of tequila on Cinco de Mayo and, drink a Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. We can do all of those things. But we're not going to throw out the Magna Carta or the Constitution or the scientific method and turn into a balkanized Yugoslavia, because wokeism told us to. We're not going to do that. We are a very special civilization if we can keep it. Not all cultures are created equal. We are multi-ethnic, but we are not multicultural. This is Western culture here, and that's the reason we're successful.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. I love the conversation that we've had. Your knowledge of stand-up comedy is incredible, because I absolutely love every one of them that you talked about. I've seen Carlin several times, including someone actually trying to attack him on stage one time.
Yeah.
So again, I appreciate your way of doing it. We didn't talk much about it, but I do highly recommend the book. Oh, there it is. I do highly recommend the book. It is because it's satirical, but it's real. And I like how you're able to talk about it. I actually read volume 2. I have not read volume 1 yet, which I probably that's my life. I usually go backwards. So.
That's fine.
But anyway, but I got one final question for you, since you keep talking about being from Philly, and I think this is probably going to be the most important question of the show. Is it Pat's or Geno's for you?
Oh, Geno's for sure. If you want to go to and I knew Joey Vento, right? So the patriarch of Geno's got in big trouble in like 2006 for putting a sign at the window where you order that said, when at Geno's, you have to speak English, right? We speak English. When ordering, speak English. Well, the left went crazy. Now, Gino spoke Italian. Joey Vento spoke Italian. A lot of the guys there speak Italian. It's South Philadelphia. It's an Italian neighborhood. So he didn't say speak Italian, because he knows that the language of commerce in the United States is English. It's on all the money with a little bit of Latin. And he was a piece of work. When I was executive producer for Laura Ingraham, he used to come on all the time and tear it up. But here's the one thing I will say. You asked me about 2 places, and I picked my favorite of the 2. Now, if you want the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia, you have to go to a place called D'Alessandro's, which is a little bit out. It's in Manayunk. It's up the Schuylkill River a little bit. It's not in Center City or South Philly. They're amazing. Now, some people, they like other places, Jim's and Campos and Tony Luke's and all these others, but D'Alessandro's, for the best actual tasting experience, absolutely. For the best sort of Philly Disneyland, and the sandwiches are good too, at Geno's. My wife loves Gino. So she's from North Carolina, so there's no nuance. So she's all in on the Geno's. Right. But for me, and I take this stuff very seriously, D'Alessandro's is the way to go.
All right. Well, you heard it here now. So, and I don't get paid for that either. So
that's right. Neither do I. Neither do I.
Well, again, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. I know you're busy trying to get everybody through this process and working through it. Wish you success with this book and the new one coming out. Let me know how we can help going forward.
All right, brother. God bless you.
Bless you.
Got a patriotic audience, and let's get after it.